Welcome back, and back with me now, Mark Bowman, and we are here with this shiny new book that you wrote. This is fantastic. The franchise, it takes you through the entire history of the Braves, not just the Atlanta Braves, but before they became the Atlanta Braves. If you think of the Braves, at least to me, you think of Mark Bowman. You've been there, you're in your 24th season of covering this team. What was your favorite part about writing this book?
Well, probably just learning more about some of the guys that, I came around at the end of, Smoltz and Maddox and Glavine. I was there for most of Chipper's career. So, yeah. but just learning a little bit more about what developed during the 90s that led up to, the continued success that you and I have continued to cover here in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Learning a little bit more about them, learning more about Ted Turner, learning more about Ted Turner's vision to not only buy this team, he bought this team just to find, content for his new cable station, his new television station, which grew into a satellite that was beamed to Hawaii and all across the nation, and the Braves became America's team. Learning more about what went into that with Terry McGurk, who was Ted's right-hand man when they had a very small television station where they just had, to get that reception, you had to move the antenna ears, rabbit ears around and all that, just to understand where they've come. Looking back through some old newspaper articles in Milwaukee when, Hank Aaron's earliest years, learning more about, Ted Turner was not scared to say anything. We had a lot of our viewers, or people watching tonight's show may remember Bob Horner, when he signed with the Braves, there was a lot of contention with his agent and the Braves and contract and this and that, and there was a lot of sparring. And Bill Lucas, who was the first black GM in baseball, he was the one. Ted never gave him the title, but that was the role he filled. He did a lot of that sparring with this agent. Well, one night after doing that, he had an aneurysm. He passed away days later. Well, Ted came out in the press and said, I'm never doing business with this guy who killed my best friend. Just going back and reading stuff like that, how Ted was, he was eccentric. He was well behind, ahead of his times in terms of innovation. Just learning more about Ted was great. Finding old quotes from Eddie Matthews where they won the 1957 World Series, and he gets back to Milwaukee. I'd never seen this or heard this, that he said, it was a day to remember. Unfortunately, I don't remember most of it. Some of the old stuff in the newspapers was great, but this is an organization that had Babe Ruth and Eddie Matthews and Hank Aaron and Chipper Jones, and there's just so much tradition there, and it tried to provide as much background and dig a little bit deeper into some of those stories as I could.
So much tradition and history, and you and I have been very lucky to be a part of some of that. And you mentioned Chipper Jones pretty much right off the top of this interview. He was the forward in this book. How beneficial was that to have Chipper there?
It was nice. I hope that you've been able to benefit from it a little bit when you just put a microphone in front of Chipper's face.
Yes.
And, I know
what you mean.
He makes our work easier.
He does.
He's able to break down the game so easily. He's just very conversational. It was great. In all honesty, to write that forward, I just basically said, Chipper, what do the Braves mean to you? And that's what was created there. And 5 minutes later, I've said, if a Braves fan read that before a playoff game, they might run through a wall. It'd be a great pep talk, by a football coach, just in terms of, pride that he has and what the Braves have meant to him. Because it's something special that the Braves have with having a guy like they have their Derek Jeter, they have their Cal Ripken, that one guy, that Mickey Mantle, that they know, Smoltz went elsewhere, Glavine went elsewhere, Maddox went elsewhere, even Hank went back to Milwaukee. Chipper is that guy who was there all along, and it's pretty special for, in this day and time to have that guy.
One of the things that I was reading when I was studying about your book is that you said fans 40 and older are really going to resonate with the beginning of this book. Fans that are younger than that have experienced a lot of success with the Braves. Right. They don't understand really the history of where this team comes from, and rightfully so, they weren't alive for some of that. But why will it resonate with that audience first and foremost, and why is it important for that younger audience to read that?
Well, the first chapter, I don't want. I'm not giving anything away here.
No, please don't. We need people to read the book.
No. I'm not giving anything away, but people, of that age, 40 or older, remember the team was a laughing stock in Atlanta from 1966 to 81, and then 82 they win, and then they don't win. And their last place team most of the rest of the decade. Yes, you had Dale Murphy to watch. Yes, TBS was around, but this team wasn't winning.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the commissioner of baseball comes to Atlanta, Fay Vincent, and he says, Terry McGurk tells him, hey, we're going to go after this guy named John Sherholtz, or not named, everyone knew who John Sherholtz. We're going after John Sherholtz, the Royals GM. And Fay Vincent said, he laughed at him. He said, why would John Sherholtz come here? And I think that'll hit with people who remember those years will understand why Fay Vincent said that. Those who have grown up and have been fortunate enough to know the Braves only as really winners, they might not really understand it. There was a time where this team was the laughingstock, and I think that's another reason I started with that with the book is, in 1991 when Sherholtz came to Atlanta and he teamed up with Bobby Cox. Bobby Cox had rebuilt the organization as the GM from 86 through 90. All of a sudden, he and that Sherholtz and Cox combination. That was the start of 14 consecutive division titles, 5 trips to the World Series throughout the 90s, and most of these past 30 plus years, the fans of Atlanta enter a season saying, there's a chance we win the World Series this year, and that's pretty special.
Something incredibly magical began then, so it's good that you kind of went back and looked at all of that stuff. Let's talk about present day just a little bit. I saw Tyler Matzik, 2021 NLCS is mentioned in your book. That run you and I were both a part of, but what do you remember about how special it was, and why was it important to kind of recapture that in your book?
Well, what I wanted to do for each World Series team, World Series winner, I wanted to add a chapter or something special from that postseason.
I love that.
And I think that night probably stood out as much as anything. There were great moments from Jorge Soler and Eddie Rosario and Jock Peterson and Max Fried getting stepped on there in that last game. Charlie Morton breaking it, having his leg broken. But that one inning with Matzik coming in there and basically just sealing the pennant, and the chance to go to the World Series. I wanted to recapture that moment. What was he thinking? What was Travis d'Arnaud thinking? Why did they pitch Betts this way? Why did that inning unfold like it did? How did this guy who's averaging 94 miles an hour most of the regular season, he's throwing 98 most of the postseason? It was a special run, a team that, in July that year, we all were planning our vacations in October, and there we were in November in Houston. It was special. How do you, there's so many different stories you could tell about that time, but I think that one night is something that Braves fans forever will say that they will remember where they were when Matzik, that one appearance.
Oh, it was such a cool run. It was really fun to be a part of, and you were a part of the runs in the 90s. Certainly, you talked about those 14 consecutive division titles, World Series championships in there as well. What do you remember the most about that run? Well,
I was a senior at the University of Dayton in 1995, so I didn't see that World Series team, but I saw the end of that run in the 90s. It was just something incredible. You knew it was something special at that moment when you had Smoltz and Glavine and Maddox and a young Chipper Jones and a young Andrew Jones and Bobby Cox. It was, they became the blueprint for all of baseball, and to think that everything that they did still has had an impact now, because what the Maddox, Glavine, Smoltz taught Chipper, he handed off to Freddie Freeman, and Freddie Freeman was able to be a part of, around Austin Riley and some of these guys. I think it's nice to be able to look back and see that professionalism, that expectation to win that these guys brought to the park on a consistent basis. You do have different looking teams every year, but you hope to have that carryover, or what Hank Aaron may have planted the seeds for way back when. Maybe Dale Murphy caught some of that from this player, and Dale Murphy was able to hand it off. I think that's kind of looking back on those 90s, there were so many stars, but I don't remember anyone. I don't remember feeling jealousy, and I think that's always been good. And a lot of that credit goes to Bobby Cox. He was able to he was a great sheriff, and he had a lot of great deputies in that clubhouse.
You know, a lot of the younger players that are tenured with the Braves for a long time, they all look up to the guys in the 90s, and they talk about it a lot. It just shows the impact that they had. So it's going to be fun for fans to read this. All right, let's wrap it up with why fans should get their hands on this book.
So I just think that, you know, you got a feeling for a lot of the stories. You remember that you know, how well Maddox, how great that part of his career is. But check here and look, you know, get his thoughts about the night that he found out he was signing with the Braves. The Braves were who he wanted to sign with. That's no secret.
Yeah.
And everyone remembers that, you know, the Braves were going to trade for Barry Bonds. Well, if they had traded for Barry Bonds, which they actually had the deal done, it fell through. Wow. But the Pirates had pulled it off the table because Jim Leland went crazy and was yelling at the GM, and you know, that, you know, if you don't know that, that's in there too. But also just, you know, the winter meetings are evolving, and Maddox doesn't think that the Braves are going to be able to afford him, or, you know, or give him even what he wants. The Yankees make this offer. He doesn't sign. He's expecting to sign.
Sure.
You know, what happens en route back to Las Vegas that changes everything. What he's expecting to sign with the Yankees, and all of a sudden he gets the good news he's signing with the Braves. So, you know, there's stuff like that. John Smoltz's drive from the night that he was traded. We all know about that trade, how big it was. But what were his thoughts during that long drive in his old beat-up car that from, you know, upstate New York to Richmond, Virginia? He goes through all of that. Chipper Jones, you know, goes back over some stories of working with Willie Stargell and many of the great instructors he had in the instructional league. Yeah, I mean, you know what these guys did, but I hope you learn a little bit about, you know, each of them. What was Glavine thinking the night or the day he woke up and there's a bunch of family members in his house for Game 6, and you know, he's, you know, got to be dad and also, you know, take care of his parents, all that kind of stuff, but be focused for the biggest game of his life, you know. You know, maybe go back and learn a little bit about what was Bobby Cox's thoughts when he was the first manager, or first time the Braves manager from 78 to 81. Yeah. You know, you get some thoughts from John Holland, a longtime clubhouse guy who he was sitting there in that Pirates. He was a visiting clubhouse guy. He was sitting there in the Pirates clubhouse there in '92 as CBS is, you know, getting ready for the celebration, and he gets to get to yell at him to get out of his clubhouse and take the champagne down the hall to where the winners are. You know, there's a lot of fun stories. I think that fans are going to enjoy this book. You know, and it was a lot of fun writing it.
Recapturing some of the most magical moments of a very storied franchise. You do it better than anyone else, Mark. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.